Well, welcome everyone. I'm Mike DiAgostino, General Manager with Cyber and your host for today's webinar entitled Beyond Buzzwords, Crafting Authentic Messages that Resonate with CISOs. We are super excited for this session, which is one in a series of webinars we've been hosting over the past 6 months or so, where we attempt to educate cybersecurity and IT vendor marketers on how to successfully engage with CISOs and other executives. We've covered pitching events, pitching AI, and now we're focused on the utilization and importance of authentic messaging. I'm joined by my colleague, Julie Jordan, the Director of Marketing Strategy. Say hello, Julie.
Hi, everyone.
Will be sharing co-hosting duties with me today, along with our esteemed panelists, including Gary Gooden, Don Gibson, and Shefali Mukincherry. So without further ado, panelists, if you could spend just a few seconds and further introduce yourselves and we'll get started. Don, you're first on the screen here. Why don't you go first?
Hi, welcome, thank you. My name's Don. I'm a CISO on the other side of the pond here. I've been in cybersecurity, or information security as it was originally known, for just over 20 years, from banking, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, gambling, gaming, national government, and I'm currently a CISO at Kinley, which is a audio-visual supplier.
Very good. And Shefali, how about yourself?
Hi, Shefali Mukincherry. I'm with the University of Illinois, Chicago. I am their Chief Information Security and Privacy Officer. Have been in the industry for cybersecurity, privacy, compliance, risk, health information management with over 25 plus years in many different industries across different settings. And so happy to be here.
Awesome. Glad to have you as well. And last but not least, Gary.
Yes, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. My name is Gary Good. I'm the former Vice President of Information Technology at Relative to Space. I have been in the cyberspace for well over a decade and in multiple verticals for over 35 years in technology, from entertainment, toy manufacturing, life sciences, healthcare, and aerospace. And just happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we've got a great panel. I'm sure tons of experience amongst the group and lots of experience being pitched to by vendor marketers. Well, we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the CyberEd board. All of the members here today, all of the panelists are part of the esteemed CyberEd board community. CyberEd board is the leading invite-only peer-to-peer networking community for CISOs and CIOs to connect, engage, learn, mentor, and most importantly, advance their careers. And CyberEd board members participate in various capacities with cyber theory. In fact, some members participate in similar exercises to this, where we poll members to gain insight and feedback on vendor marketing and messaging, providing invaluable, very transparent guidance for marketers, which we hope to tackle today. And just a quick blurb on us, Cyber Theory. We are a marketing advisory and agency focused exclusively on cybersecurity and IT vendors. We say we sit at the intersection of cybersecurity, data, and marketing, and offer everything from go-to-market strategies, content development, creative services, media buying and lead generation, MarTech stack integration, and even sales acceleration. So, back to the session at hand. We are going to dive into a critical yet often overlooked aspect of cybersecurity marketing, and it shouldn't be, which is authentic messaging. I spend way too much time with ChatGPT trying to create relevant images, and I thought this was probably the best output from all the variations that I saw leading up to this session. Does this look like an extreme version of the RSA conference or Black Hat Expo halls? Because that's what I was going for. Maybe not, but this is probably a good representation of that overwhelming feeling when you first enter a massive expo hall. Just a lot of noise, right? And given that cybersecurity is an industry where trust is paramount, understanding how to effectively communicate with CISOs and cybersecurity practitioners is not just beneficial, it's essential. So during this session, we will explore why traditional sales approaches typically fall short, and how genuine, informed communication can make a significant impact, right? So we'll discuss strategies for crafting messages, the importance of sincerity, especially when dealing with things like AI messaging, and how to distinguish your brand in a crowded marketplace. So get ready to gain valuable insights from real CISOs and industry leaders on building meaningful, trust-based relationships with your most important clients. Let's get started. All right. I'm going to stop sharing here and jump into our discussion points. And just to make it clear for everybody watching right now, this is being recorded. Feel free to revisit and or share with your colleagues once you get the notification that the session is available. So let's jump in, as we've got a decent agenda to cover over the next 40 minutes or so. So first things first, let's get FUD out of the way, right? The use of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This one is so obvious, and most marketers have heard this, is not the best way to market their products, but we still see it. Why doesn't it work? Gary, maybe you want to jump in first.
Sure. It doesn't work, but well, it doesn't work in my mind, specifically because I think cyber practitioners have spent so many years listening to FUD as a key driver that they're literally tone deaf on that specific message. That's from my estimation in my 10 years specifically in the cyberspace. And it does come across as completely non-genuine. And quite frankly, it speaks to the sales individual just simply not either understanding their audience or understanding the market that they're trying to target specifically.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Don, any thoughts there on the use of FUD?
As the brilliant sign in the picture you just shared, I think said it was the second top on the right. I'm fairly sure it said "we blorple," which is absolutely perfect. So FUD is for me, it's almost insulting in a way. The simple fact is that we're all cyber professionals. We all know what the worst case scenario is. Some of us have been in the worst case scenario, and yet we're still here. The companies we work for are still here. The world still continues to turn. So for me, I think it needs to be dosed with a healthy amount of realism, rather than going, "Oh, the sky is falling, the sky is falling," and the whole world, the whole process just doesn't work like that. It's a case of making sure that we can understand, say, quantify the risk, understand what the threat vector is, understand where things could be falling apart or falling through. And the last thing we really need when we're juggling these thoughts and processes and teams and everything else we do, for a senior director to go, "We've just been told by a company that they've got our data and they want us to have licenses," not mentioning any names. So it's a case of there's just better ways of doing it, I'd say. You don't need to be leading with the nuclear option.
That's good. And Shafali, over to you. Have you ever purchased a product based on the fear created around potentially not having that product?
No, I have not actually, because one of my things that I look for, when I'm approached by a salesperson is, if they're going to use FUD, then they better know how it relates to my organization, right? And so if they say, "Hey, you know what, Shafali, we have noticed that XYZ is happening in the university industry," then they've got my ear. But if they say, "Oh, in general, this is, the X percentage of cyber attacks happen for X reason," it's like, okay, well, tell me something I don't know, right? And so, when a salesperson comes to me, if they draw my attention to the industry I'm in, likewise to a similar organization that had an impact, I would be interested, right? So FUD can work to a certain degree, but it's based on how the salesperson approaches us, right? As we are looking at knowing or trying to get to a point of we don't know certain things. And if a salesperson comes up to us and says, "Well, yes, you know what? Here's the general statements. well, it's not telling us something different.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to context. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes here, but in general, yeah, I tend to think maybe some of the FUD in marketing has gone away to a certain degree, but it seems like when there are new products or technologies, one of the first go-tos is to utilize that fear of not having that product because you're not going to be able to prevent whatever kind of newer age or newer type things that this product is meant to address. And then things mature up over time. But the next talking point, which I think really resonated with our panelists during our planning call, it was called a couple of different things, but I'll phrase it as skipping the date and going right to the marriage. So if someone can just put that into context for us and our listeners, and then talk about, why that does not work. Don, maybe you want to kick things off.
I will happily talk about such a subject. My take on it is every tool that is open to a CISO comes via a company, comes via a salesperson or anyone like that. We need to know who they are. There has to be a trust. It has to be a symbiotic relationship between the people selling and the people using. And with that, we can't just jump straight across into, hi, I'm this, buy my product. We need to have an actual understanding, a conversation, truly just a way of understanding what's between both ourselves. I think one of the most powerful conversations I've ever had with a salesman is I sat down with a clear understanding about what I want, said, is this what your tool does? And they went, no, it isn't. And from that point on, any time that I've had a chance to give this salesman a call, now he still works in the industry, I'm giving him a call because I know that I can get a really good answer from him.
No doubt. No doubt. How about yourself, Shafali?
Yeah, so I think, this is where you get that email or you get that phone call. To be honest, I don't answer any of my phone calls because I know it's going to be a sales pitch for a number I don't know. And so I rely on the email that comes to, hey, Shafali, we're this company, we're that company, we can do these things for you. Do you have 15 minutes to talk tomorrow? Well, if you really knew my schedule, if you really knew the role of a CISO, you'd be like, okay, can we talk in 2 weeks, right? And so,
oh, maybe we lost Shafali there a bit.
customer, if I'm the salesperson.
There we go. You just went off the screen for a couple of seconds, Shafali.
Oh, okay, apologies. Yeah, so I think, with the salesperson is really getting to know their customer, what industry they represent, what are the organizations that are similar. Because if a salesperson walks in and says, yeah, I realize that 20% of the university market is experiencing this. Is this something you're experiencing too as well, right? So some kind of relationship needs to be built. But in order for that relationship to be built, there's got to be certain things that are important to, us as CISOs, right? What we can identify with. So that ability to build that relationship on something similar or something that will trigger our interest, right? Just don't tell me what your company is doing. Tell me how it will impact my own organization if we were to implement such a tool or services, right?
Absolutely. And Gary, go ahead. Looks like you want to say something, and then I've got some comments as well, please.
Yeah, no, I agree with both what Don and Shafali said. Again, just like Shafali, I never answer cold calls. And with respect to emails, rarely do respond to emails, especially if they make the perfunctory comment about, do you have time this week for 15 minutes? To her comment, if they understood the role of the CISO or the person responsible for the security of the organization, they know that they just don't have that kind of time. It has to be scheduled out. So that almost becomes its own filter in a strange kind of way. So I think the key message is understand the industry you're pitching into. Have a clear marketing campaign that's consistent across other peers that might be trying to pitch to that industry. Understand specifically the company that you're talking to. And what I mean by that is the situation where you understand the kinds of things that they might want to protect, whether it's health information, whether it's intellectual property, whether it's employees, contractors alike, or in the case of healthcare patients. And if you understand that, then you can create a cogent message in terms of narrowing down the scope of the request so that at the very least, you'd probably garner more interest from the person doing that than if you were to just give them a broad-based response or a request for some sort of interaction. So that's what I think.
Can I also jump in and say on the messaging thing, whatever you do, do not send blind calendar invitations asking yourself into inviting yourself into a CISO's diary or anyone's diary. It's just rude. And we want to, when we want to have a conversation with you, we want to have a conversation with you. It's a thing that has to happen. Just the door is there for opening, not bashing down.
And just one more comment based on what Don just said. I think that comes from a scenario where you don't have a cogent marketing campaign, right? Which is consistent. So what you have is you might have junior sales or marketeers who are reaching out and they're using a generic campaign model to interact because it's worked for them in the past, and they might not necessarily be tailoring that campaign to pitch to you as a CISO or the person in charge of the cyber stack. They might be using the same campaign to pitch to a CFO. They might be using the same campaign to pitch to a CEO. So sometimes they go for the C-suite directly or a CIO, and it's worked for them in the past. So to a weird perspective is that it probably comes down to a bit of laziness as well in terms of how to tailor marketing campaigns. That's what I feel.
Right on the mark, Gary. And I want to say my first reaction is, man, it sounds like a lot of work what you guys are describing. I'm half joking here, but that's what sales and marketing organizations should be doing. And Julie, if you have any comments, and then we'll jump into the context discussion. But we see programs from just a wide range of cybersecurity vendors, right? Everything from startups to the most mature of the mature organizations. And it is a very common theme that you see marketing organizations wanting to use or reuse the same assets, irregardless of the audiences that they're pitching to. And we understand that there are resource and time constraints and otherwise, but that's what I said, it sounds like a lot of work, but if you really want to do it correctly, there should be context behind every message. Do you see the same things, Julie?
Yes, and it's interesting to me that, as a marketer, I tend to think of when we talk about messaging being what is the hero message on your website? What's the first thing they see when anybody goes to your website, a CISO? But the reality is, especially as the panelists are saying, often the first contact is coming from sales, sometimes from marketing, but often from sales. And so it's interesting that messaging really has to be, rolled all the way through the right kind of sales enablement. We have a lot of clients where we provide tools and enablement types of resources about how to talk to a CISO. And it's specifically to align the sales teams with what, the good messaging that marketing comes up with in order to not just burn through these great CISO contacts that they might have with something that really clearly doesn't work, or or an approach that doesn't work, a methodology. So it's interesting how messaging really encompasses not just, the main marketing types of activities that a marketer might do day-to-day demand gen, content creation, email, website, but really sales enablement is such a critical factor too.
Absolutely. Well, let's get deeper and talk more about this appropriate messaging. And I can preface this by drawing from data from one of our CISO engagement studies. A couple of times per year, we look at the first party intent data that we have access to from the ISMG network, our parent company. And based on the hundreds of marketing programs executed on at any given time. And these programs include thousands of assets from white papers to webinars to interviews to case studies and more. And we examine, amongst many other data points, which assets create the most engagement with C-level executives, with CISOs and CIOs and other executives. And time again, we see that context is paramount. So for our marketers out there, are you using a generic case study asset, but pitching it to audiences in different specific industries? Are you using a technical or product-centric white paper, for example, to market to CISOs and other C-level business executives? So for our panelists, maybe we can flip the script. What does work? You know, when you look for messaging that might include any of the number of topics that we've just discussed, what actually does stand out to you? How can marketers put their messaging in context so that it resonates the best with you? Maybe Shefali, if you want to take the first stab here.
Yeah, I think, where I have found that it has to deal with the relationship, right? So, sometimes it starts with that email, but it's a short email that will get my attention. And if I get a long email, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll get to that later. I never get to it. I have so many that I never get to. I don't know any CISO that's not behind on email, by the way. So I'll just say that it's hard to keep up with emails. And many of the emails that I get that are sales, I've got them filtered and put in a folder. So, realistically, if you're really going to get my attention, it's going to be with not just a percentage of something that, will be decreased or improved. It's really more so, hey, did you hear about this article that talks about AI and how it works for universities or how universities are using it? That tells me, oh, this person's in tune with my industry, with my organization type. Not necessarily my own organization, but the type, right? So when I get a headliner, hey, article might be interesting. Now they've got my attention, and now I'm looking at it going, oh, okay, well, then I see that they're a salesperson. I'm like, okay, so maybe this person knows my industry, knows the type of organization. And so I might want to give them a call and say, hey, let's set up a time to talk. This article is really interesting, right? So sometimes it's the articles or a white paper, like you were mentioning, that are interesting. The second thing is that I look for is, how hard is this person really working to establish a relationship versus just getting on my calendar? So, there's an email that will come and say, hey, you know what? Why don't you go ahead and, here's the Calendly link. I never respond to those. Just like Gary, you were talking about, I never respond to those. So what does work though is, hey, is it okay if we have a call in the next couple of weeks? Then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, we can figure it out. I can send you to my assistant and we can get something on the books for in a couple of weeks. So that's a strategy that works. The third piece is this. Hey, do you have time for coffee, or do you have time, take you and your team out to lunch? Something to say, hey, outside of your job, is there a way to engage? Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. It just depends. But if it's further out in the weeks, then that's something that's also recognizable and doable. So I think it's timing and the approach.
Nice. So you do go on the coffee dates then?
every
once in a while.
Every once in a while, but they're further out, like 2 months out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How about Gary? You're done.
So the relationship for me is of paramount importance. However, so let me flip this on its head for a bit. If you, as a cyber practitioner, have a firm understanding of what you need to protect, all right, that's the first thing. And if you also then have a firm understanding in terms of the culture of the organization that you're supporting, in other words, if you understand the risk tolerance of that organization, then I have to make the assumption that you have developed some sort of strategic plan that you're trying to execute against. Now, you might have a situation where you're also just running a cyber operation. So that's a business continuity issue, right? You're running a cyber operation as at the same time you're trying to execute against a strategic plan. The strategic plan, again, is going to be covering the things that are going to reduce risk to the environment. Pure point of fact. Therefore, if you get an inbound, a nuanced inbound from a salesperson primarily, who is speaking to one of the things that might be on your strategic roadmap, that is something that will garner interest with me. If you're also in a situation where, yes, you have a strategic roadmap, yes, you're running an operational organization, but you get an inbound for an emerging threat vector, which was hitherto before not seen, that will also get my interest, because now you're introducing, it's like, the difference between planned and non-planned capital spend. So non-planned capital spend is a change to the business environment, right? So in this case, it's a change to the cyber threat environment, which is now causing me to react to that change. So those types of interactions will get my attention. And I think it comes down to this whole notion of understanding who you're trying to talk to. So that's the way I see it.
I'd agree. I'm going to pitch directly between Shefali and you, Gary. For me, it's scope is massively important. I've got to say that emails are just dead. There's literally no point emailing me about something that you want to sell me unless I have an existing relationship with you. And the same goes for LinkedIn, by the way. For the rest of it, it's how do you get that relationship? How do you start that relationship? And Shefali was absolutely spot on by saying, it's like, can I take you or your team out for lunch or a coffee? Or my company's produced this bit of training, generic training about X. Would it be useful to the team? And we start almost the bartering and the whole relationship with a gift or a just something to show that you're not there just for you, that this is the start of a relationship, and hopefully a long-term relationship. And there's some salespeople that I've known for well over a decade, and they will always be on a short list, no matter what or where. Even if it's just a case of a conversation and, yeah, this isn't going to work again, or okay, let's talk a bit more. Let's put this. How do we get a proof of value, proof of concept, all that kind of stuff put together? But once again, we're dialing down to trust, and where that comes from is that. So I'm involved with a number of groups over here on this side of the Atlantic, where we invite certain capabilities or tool sets, vendors in, and they're invited on the fact that they've delivered good work with a peer group, and we will start the conversation. I also, funnily enough, I DJ with a group called the Cyber House Party, where we turn up at places like InfoSec. Hopefully I'll be playing at DEF CON this year. But so it's a case of people are meeting up and talking outside of a normal environment, and we can start having the conversation. And that is a really, really good way of breaking the ice, of starting the relationship, getting the face known, getting the voice known, getting the energy known, and starting the journey.
I just want to interject one point just to write off what you said, Don. I think the interaction tends to, you talk about the relationship building. I can see that happening, especially if you're dealing with a VAR, okay, where you have somebody going to build a trusted relationship over a period of time. And the way I've done it in the past is, if, again, I'm looking at a specific space within the cyber stack, like say, for example, secrets management or or cloud security posture management, I tend to reach out to the specific companies themselves. I don't wait for salespeople because I kind of know what I want. And that starts the conversation. And if they come at me with a less than thoughtful response, I don't waste my time with them. If I'm dealing with a VAR, and to Shafali's point, said, hey, yes, we operate in this space, we resell and partner with X, and we sell on behalf of blah, 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 and it makes sense, then I will set something up to then sit and have the initial set of conversations. Because again, as Michael said, the context is important. So you end up with a more nuanced conversation, and then ultimately you have the potential to develop relationships that might be quote unquote rife for repeat sales in the future.
Yeah, this is great. This is all fantastic feedback. And what I'm taking out of it is that, and we're kind of using that analogy with dating and marriage and that sort of thing, but it is very true, even in a sales relationship, that there is an emotional attachment, right? And I think that's where the relationship comes into play and that level of trust comes into play. And to kind of bridge it back together, what Julie was talking about earlier was that can even start before that outreach attempt is made to you, right? Things like messaging and what vendors are using as part of their messaging platform. It behooves them to build in a human element that is going to start creating an emotional connection. Because if everything is just all ones and zeros and plain black and white, and we solve this or that, it commoditizes things, right? But we're all humans. We're all looking for that sort of relationship connection.
I would say also, Mike, just real quick on that is another thing that we can take away from what Gary has said is that if he is interested in a particular type of technology and he might initiate some of the outreach, you want to make sure you're in market enough with enough impressions to associate your particular solution type and technology with your company so that when the CISOs or the organizations that you're targeting drop into the market for those particular solutions, you have some top of mind awareness to get there. So it's really hard to build that out of thin air. You really have to kind of keep a steady drumbeat of impressions of the market, I'd say, associating your particular solution with your with your company.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Michael, just one more thing, kind of going off of what Julie just said, is that what I find very helpful, and it's a strategy I know one salesperson at least uses it, is that, hey, Shafali, I'm getting together with the CISO at Northwestern University. Would you like to come have breakfast with the two of us? That got my eye, right? So if there's a peer that a salesperson can say, hey, you know what, I'm meeting with this person, would you like to join us? Or there's a peer, dinner that's happening. We've got, CISOs from these 10 different organizations. We'd love to have you. Then, looking at the list, I might say, oh yeah, you know what, this would be great to network. So opening up networking for a CISO is also an attractive approach.
You're giving lots of ideas to our listeners, I'm sure. Thank you.
I was just going to say, clear your calendars because.
Yes. No, that's good, though. That's a great point. And we hear that over and over that people want to network with their peers, right? So bringing in a product specialist or someone that's not at the same level as you is not going to resonate as much. So spot on. Well, what about everybody's favorite topic of the day, AI? We've seen, I think, in cybersecurity at least, AI, and as a subset, I would say machine learning has been pitched for a number of years. But obviously, as generative AI has rocketed to the scene, it seems nearly 100% of vendors now tout some kind of AI integration. So how do you, as executives and CISOs and cybersecurity leaders, how do you cut through the marketing speak and really truly understand how, if at all, AI is impacting these solutions when you're messaged to? Anybody an AI extraordinaire that wants to jump in? Gary?
I'm not an AI extraordinaire, but for me, it's pretty straightforward. The modus operandi for me doesn't change. It just doesn't change. I mean, if you think about what some of these companies that are doing, that are utilizing this type of artificial intelligence in their product stack, they're literally up-armoring their technology stack to compensate for whether it's advanced persistent threat actors, whether it's ransomware for as a service, bad actors who are using AI to speed up the rate at which they can actually infiltrate an organization, whereas it would be minutes, now it's now seconds. Your defensive posture, you have seconds, if not milliseconds, to react. So it's really an up-armoring game, as it were. And again, if I'm looking at a specific market, let's say, for example, a managed SIM environment, then it's a lot easier to look at, say, that environment and say, okay, how are they doing with events per second? What is their quote unquote analyst stack look like? What is their automated message platform? Are they embedded SOAR in their response platform? How are they using AI to embed in SOAR for that specific purpose of responding to a threat? So you have to, from my perspective, you have to get really granular in terms of the requirements you're trying to garner for the product you're looking at. And so it's just another way of vetting a product stack, one against the other. And for me, the AI piece of it is really just about the speed at which code is being written, the speed at which they're up-arming their product set, and the speed at which they can respond when bad actors are trying to infiltrate an environment, or the speed at which I can garner information like, say, posture management, for example, in relation to things that I might have to adjust on my side. So from that perspective, it's not about changing the strategy. It's, again, I think it's more about having a more nuanced look at the fidelity of the product you're looking at and the requirements you're trying to attend to relative to the type of product you're trying to get. So that's the way I try and think about it.
Sounds like a lot of automation, sort of catches your eye. But when you hear AI being pitched in some way, shape, or form, is it like an eye roll moment? Like, oh, here we go again, another AI. I see Don shaking his head.
It's just like what happened when people were pitching themselves as having a SASE product, right? When in fact, they didn't have a SASE product. It was more of a marketing gimmick. So again, if you're a practitioner who understands what you're trying to protect, you understand the type of organizations or entity that are attacking you. So you kind of have to understand yourself first, right? Then it's much easier for then you as a practitioner to then carve a cohesive strategy around response and protection. And then that essentially creates a framework for the way in which you interact with third parties, whether it's a vendor directly with a product or with a VAR that's selling on behalf of a vendor. And whether it's AI related or not, that's just a mechanism at the speed at which they can provide those services.
Yeah, and Gary, I think those are some great points. I will just say that, I look at it a little differently for AI, because being a university, we have students using AI to write their papers, right? To study, to create note cards, to take notes in class. And so there's different nuances. And so, from a perspective of who the user is where I kind of look at this and say, okay, if I'm a security professional, what Gary said is spot on, right? But if I am looking at a third-party vendor that is going to put AI into their product, such as Microsoft or Box or Grammarly or any others, right, that are out there that embed AI, then I have to look and do my due diligence, my due care to make sure that that AI does not cause any harm or is going to put the university out of compliance with some kind of law or regulation. So then my next questions flow into the privacy side related to consent and intellectual property, right? Gary brought up intellectual property earlier. And so I think this is where AI can be an enabler, but we have to have a careful thought process through and vet it, right? That due diligence piece becomes very critical as far as if it's going to be enabled in the environment that I have. Because we do have research and the institutional review board. And so, if I'm going to use a tool that can comb through file folders as an example, and could have protected health information in there, did I go get that consent from that patient before I even was able to crawl through those file folders, right? To say, yes, I'm going to be able to pull that information as part of the results of that AI tool pulling it. So I think there's context here as far as AI, more to learn, more to come on that. But I'm always willing and learning more about AI every day, reading more, trying to really understand what the implications are of AI.
I think you've absolutely nailed it, Shefali, with especially with the data side of it. You have to have a very, very close eye on what it's helping itself to learn, to carry on, and then hallucinations, etc., and the like. For me, the whole blow up of AI in the last year or so has been very much a marketing led event. Gary nailed it with the SASE piece. Everyone talked about that. Now they're talking about AI, and I predict in 2 years the next one's going to be quantum, where everyone's going to be talking about quantum, and it's going to be led by marketing, etc. for that. Does that mean that any of that has disappeared in the past? It's like, no, it's still there and still being used. For me, the best way of thinking about or stopping a verbal eye roll when I'm approached about AI is the fact that the difference between machine learning and AI is machine learning exists in Python and AI exists in PowerPoint. As such, it is purely a marketing piece. It's there, it's being used. How we can use it safely and securely is the big step. I believe that we can, but we have to get our ducks in a row to make sure that everything is there.
I just want to make one comment back on what Shefali said, and also to what you said, Don. I think that what's incumbent upon us is to ensure that we have a quote unquote a policy around the use of the technology stack. At the last organization I wrote their policy, but also to understand, to Shefali's point, where your corpus of data actually resides. So if it's an IRB related research study, then yes, you're going to be pulling, because all you're really doing is a really fancy way to crawl, right? But if it's crawling against data which is incomplete, you're going to have a problem. And that will lead to your comment about hallucinations, et cetera. So I think you have to understand where your corpus of data is, whether it's on-prem, off-prem, where is it? And then if you understand that, coupled with your policies, then you probably have a better handle on how to manage the quote-unquote end-user population that's going to use it irrespective. Which is why I really think that it's not a question about trying to moderate its usage. It's more of a question of trying to understand how it's being used. Okay.
No doubt.
From a messaging standpoint, one thing I would add is that, AI, SASE, zero trust, quantum, all of these are kind of placeholder terms that are building meaning around them so that you can say one thing and mean, kind of a word picture, a thousand words. But it's really what, from a messaging standpoint, what do those packages of benefits, what do they actually do for an organization or a CISO or, security posture? So when we work with clients on messaging, we don't lead, let's say, with AI, or we don't lead with quantum. We say, what does it do? What does it do better? And then the technology or that buzzword may be the backup story or why it happens that way. But we find that breaks through, a lot more credibly.
No doubt. And I know that came up in some of our planning discussions here, which was provide further context, right? Like there was something, we secure the world, right? A lot of vendors use that message, but it doesn't mean anything, right? Provide some context. What are you securing? What does your product do, right? Give me some data. Well, listen, group, we're almost out of time here, and there are just so many more talking points. We're not going to get through everything. I guess just two very more quick ones before we hop off. Shafali, you brought up one which was based on during our planning discussion, common used tropes, and one of those would be something like presenting to the board, right? That seems like a timeless topic that everybody deals with, but doesn't necessarily resonate with you. How can vendors make that a more effective topic of conversation, do you think?
Yeah, I think, when vendors approach and say, yeah, we've got, come to this webinar or seminar or come to this conference and, you'll learn how to talk to the board. Well, I do that, as part of my job, or, we all have something we do anyway with the board at some point in time. And so I think the messaging there is really, don't tell me how I should talk to the board because I know that already. Tell me what I don't know that I should be telling the board. For example, here is a way to decrease your time to identify an incident to time to resolution. If I'm looking for a SOC as an example, right? That might be a selling point to say, yes, we can talk to you about how you can pitch it to your board. Give me the strategies of how, and then back it up with data. And if that's something that a vendor can do, then you've got my ear, right? And in my eyes to understand really how I should be talking to the board to get that SOC in place. Or if it's some new vendor tool that I'm looking to put in place. How do I justify the cost, justify the impact that it'll have? Because most of the time I know on the university side, I'm always looking at impact and then cost, right? Because I've got a diverse environment. It's federated, separated, aligned. It's very complex. It's global, and governmental. So I think this is where when someone says talking to the board, context, approach, and then what is it exactly that you're going to do to help me justify the cost of that tool or justify that service. And if I'm going to ask for millions, then of course it's going to go to a board, right? So that cost is also a factor. There's certain thresholds I know I'm allowed to just go ahead and spend, right? Some of us CISOs are, some of us may not be, but I will say that there's thresholds of spend that, go through different levels of approvals. And so that understanding is something I think vendors should, know as well.
Also, which board? Are we talking about going to the dean, or are we going to a technical review board? Which board are we talking about? There's the audience is very reliant on what the story is or what you're trying to say. I've been told recently last year, and it stuck with me, that a good CISO is a good storyteller, and to be able to tell the story to the board, to lead them on the journey about where you expect to be. Because when you go into that kind of board to ask for something, it's not quite Oliver Twist, cap in hand, please sir, can I have some more? It's you're trying to sell the strategy and a way of getting there, and to Gary's point, reducing the risk. So therefore, how you tell that story, in what kind of language, and how you can support me telling that story is going to be really good for me.
No doubt. Good. Well, minus any more comments on this one, last question for everybody before we let you go here. And this is just fantastic feedback, really is. And I think we're doing a good job educating some of our listeners here. Let's go back to our graphic. You're getting ready to go into this fictional AI generated expo hall with wrong text and just a sea of vendors here. What advice can you give? What advice can you give to our vendor marketers that are getting ready for the RSA conference and Black Hat and InfoSec Europe and the countless other major conferences and expo halls they go to? How can they stand out from the masses, if they even can? Any advice that you can give our listeners here?
Yeah, I mean, apart from having nice swag, be authentic. Be authentic. Understand who is walking into your hall. Understand who is walking into your hall. Respect who is walking into your hall, and craft your message based on those two things of understanding and respect of the individuals walking into that hall. If you do those two things, I think you will be just fine. That's my perspective.
I think my one would be have a chat before you try to scan a badge. Don't just try to snipe across the to gather this, that, and the other. And actually have a conversation. Don't stand in front of a massive multi-million-dollar stand going, "Have you ever heard of us?" It's like, I've been in this world, in the cyber world, longer you've been alive. Come on. It's like, how are you enjoying this? How are your feet? Do you want some water? Anything like that to actually kind of throw some personality in there. And for the visit, that's for the people selling. For the visitors, have a look at the list of people that are actually supposed to be there. I always found it was a really good place to go and get answers to very technical questions that my account manager would not be able to understand. So it was a case of actually going and finding the knowledgeable people there, as they often have some very, very good pre-sales there. And apart from that, enjoy yourself. Enjoy. It is a lot of fun, and so enjoy the fun.
Good.
Yeah.
And how about you, Shafali?
Yeah, and I would just say that, getting to know your customer is important, to the point of where you can say, yeah, you know what, that was a meaningful conversation. I learned these top 3 things from that person, right? And maybe the top 3 things can consist of, one thing is that I really understand where that person's coming from as part of where they work. Their CISO role in context to where they work. That's one thing. The second thing is that context, right, that we talk about. How does that vendor's tools or services, how would they play in the environment of their client or customer's environment? Really understanding that and offering peer, networking as well. The third piece here is just the whole approach and building that relationship so that it turns into a meaningful relationship where it's not just, hey, I'm checking in this month, I'm checking in that month. It's really, hey, I've got an article here for you to read, or hey, would you like to meet somebody else? And so I think there's multiple approaches that vendors can take to entice CISOs, not just with statistics, and I think the building of the meaningful way to attract a CISO's attention is really empathy towards that CISO or that privacy person, right? Is really understanding what they're going through. Because if you did, then your sales pitch, your sales approach will be very different than just getting on a call and tell me your landscape without telling me anything about the company, right? So everybody's hungry for that landscape. They want to know your environment right away, but they don't, as soon as I hear a salesperson do that to me, I'm like, oh, I've got another meeting. Sorry, gotta go, right? Because that's a turnoff when people want to know more about you, but they don't offer up what they do if it's like a cold call, right? So I think there's different approaches, different tact and context.
Very good. Well, all great comments and great feedback. I think what I'm hearing, 2 major themes, relationship building and context. Those are 2 paramount things that marketers cannot skip. And once again, thank you to our wonderful panelists for lending their time today. Again, we're continuing to chip away and hopefully educate with these sessions, cybersecurity and IT vendor marketers on how they best can go to market. Tons of little gems throughout this conversation. We're going to try to summarize everything for our viewers and listeners, and looking forward to the next session in the series. So once again, for everybody from Cyber Theory, thanks again to Cyber Ed Board for lending our panelists today. Hope to see you at another session upcoming, and thank you for joining us.